All right. Great. It's another day. I hope you guys are all ready with your questions. Let's make it a really lively panel. Your thoughts on the topic of the panel is startups and corporates working together. So that's exactly what our event's about. That's what you're here for. So I'm expecting a fairly lively panel. So don't be shy with questions, please. I think you know three of our panelists already, right? Do you want to introduce yourself, John Wass?
Sure. I'm John Wass. I'm the CEO of Profit Isle. I'm also a serial entrepreneur. And my first startup early on was a small little company called Staples. So I was part of the team there early on, and I've done a series of startups since then. So I've been on both sides of this equation, both on the acquiring side and the engagement side, as well as being a startup working with large corporations.
Yeah, I found John Wass has a lot of great thoughts on startups working with corporates. And we have two folks in the middle who are on the corporate venture side who can talk about the perspective of corporates. And I do want to mention also Professor Ramesh Roskar is multi-talented. Besides being a professor, he's also started a couple startups, had mentored a lot of his students doing startups, as well as being at Facebook and Apple, working with them on AI. So a lot of different, both from a corporate perspective and from a startups perspective, you have some thoughts to share. Great, so let's get started. First of all, just what are your thoughts and perspectives on startups and corporates working together? Maybe we can start from the middle, the two corporate venture folks.
Well, I can start. So I mean, already as I mentioned during the opening of the welcoming speech, it's becoming very, very important for big companies to work with startups. I mean, in the old days, there was especially a lot of mentality about not invented here syndrome, and we can do it. We have our roadmap. Why do we need to work with startups? All that has been changing quite rapidly in the last 10 to 20 years. I would say the startups are moving very quickly. They're very innovative. Big corporate research centers, the efficiency of R&D has gone down quite a bit, mainly because it just becomes very costly to run a big R&D lab, corporate R&D labs. So as a consequence, just there's a big push. Actually, the drive comes really from the top down. The CEO level and chairman level, they understand that the corporate development model has come to a brick wall that really needs to work with startups to advance innovation. So I think there's quite a bit of interest.
Yes, is the mic working? Yeah. So I would say, in a nutshell, that corporate to startup is not a match. Is not a marriage that is naturally happening. Right?
So to be controversial, yes.
Yeah, that's today's my stance, I would say. But I think, corporate need a real slap in the face to react and realize the importance of startup. In our case, Airbus actually had the chance to meet in 2003 a young guy who came to us and say, I want to build rockets. He's like, who are you? It's rocket science, right? So no, I really want to build a rocket. So okay, fine. What have you done before? Build a system of payment called PayPal. Wow. What's PayPal? We're in 2003 Europe, so we don't know what's PayPal. And we're not using it. So anyway, the wake-up call 10 years after is 17 successful launches of Falcon 9. Elon Musk has done what he said he will do, slightly delayed, but actually did it, and it's rocket science, and it's a good damn rocket. Right, so at the end of the day, those wake-up calls actually can save a company, and people just react and say, yeah, maybe we should re-engage, because any corporate at some point was a startup. Right? They just lost their soul, which is a concept. It's just re-engaging.
I think I've played various roles. I have worked in big companies and worked in startups. I have served on investment investment teams at big companies on acquisitions, and I think the role has definitely changed. I think there was a time when startups were had to kind of scale on their own, and now and there was always a reluctance to have a strategic investor involved. But that's not true anymore. I think often we have strategic investors who are able to keep an arm's length relationship in terms of how they interact with the startup and actually behave very much like a traditional venture capital firm, so which is a fantastic change I've seen over time. And my role as a professor at MIT Media Lab, I also get to see both sides, startups interacting with our corporate friends. And I think I just have to say that interaction has really improved over the last few years.
Interactions improved, but there's still probably ways to go. John, you want to give that perspective?
Sure, I have sort of 3 points that I'd like to make around the interface between startups and large corporations. First is they need a much faster way to talk about intellectual property, because the dance that happens between a startup with some cool new idea and a corporation who's trying to sort of minimize their risk of being either taken advantage of or looking foolish is really a big issue. And I've had too many conversations with corporate lawyers with them saying, well, if you do this pilot or POC, we own your IP. And that's their starting point, and you have a whole conversation. Now, I know it changes over time, but that's happened to me recently. So it's not really changing all that fast. So that's one area, and this is one of the things that I think MIT really helped with is trying to come up with a common way to talk about that. The second thing is corporations need to change their clock speed and their risk profile to re-engage with a little entity. So using, and you had mentioned this before, they need a little escape hatch or they need a little docking module or something. But the risk patterns for corporations are don't look stupid, don't make mistakes. And the risk pattern for a startup is look stupid often and make as many mistakes as you can as fast as possible. Those 2 points have to really find a way to mesh. And some corporations do it well because they think about it. But that clearly you need an engagement point. And then the third point I'd make is even if you get past the proof of concept or the pilot, the corporation has to think about how is it going to scale. We're dealing with 2 things of radically different scale. 1, 2, 3 orders of magnitude difference depending on how big you go with a corporation and how small you are as a startup. You need actually a thoughtful plan on how to scale, because if it's really important to the corporation, they'll freak out and say, oh my God, it's so important, and this is this little company. We either can't use it or need to blow past it because we've learned something and now we need to. So you need to think through what that scale looks like. And my favorite story is my last company. We did a proof of concept, and the people who did the proof of concept and the startup said it was a spectacular success. Everyone, exactly what we said we're going to do, we did it on time, did it on budget. Then we went to roll it out, and the next level of the corporation looked at that and said, that is something we are never going to do. It's like, we want nothing to do with what you just proved you could do. Now, 5 years later, they did it, but my point is that if there's a disconnect between the engagement team and the larger corporation, it tends to create a lot of churn. And these things can be thought through and institutionalized. And I think this is one of the opportunities that a lot of corporations have, is that there are methodologies and ways to manage this, but you have to be thoughtful, and it really isn't a random event. You have to actually spend the energy and the time to think organization about it. So a little bit longer than you wanted, but those are the 3 points.
3 great points around IP, around risk profile matching, around how to move from POC to the rest of the organization. Now, Tomas, you've been on the factory floor, you've been in the business units, now you're in venture investing. How are you guiding startups, that you've seen? You invest in a couple of our startups, helping them to connect with the rest of the business units.
Well, that's an everyday challenge, and the 3 points are extremely valid. And I think yes, there are improvements, but IP remains kind of in 2 different worlds. In short, I think in some point we need a safe zone or place in between the world of corporate and startup where the conversation can actually happen between people.
At MIT?
MIT could be one. In Europe, I mean, we have a history of getting angry quickly and making a lot of wars. So we have Switzerland. So Switzerland, we go skiing in Switzerland, all of us, French, German, and we find solutions. Well, we need the Switzerland of venture capital somehow. And it's probably and it's counterintuitive, it's in the governance and the way we do things. my point here is the glue between startup and corporate, it's clear it's money, right? There's a transaction, right? There's money exchange, I pay for a POC, I want to pay for your growth, I want stakes, I want equity. There's a dollar sign or a euro sign in between. And that makes things quite complicated. So how do you manage that? How do you protect the interest on both sides? But at the end of the day, I think for corporate venture, or perceived as corporate venture, we used to promise outcome. We used to say, take the Airbus money, and then you'll put your technology on an aircraft. Well, that does not happen. It will never happen. So I think we get a shift from promising outcome to delivering access. Right? Delivering access is not the same thing. It's, I will invest in your technology, and I happen to know a few people on the other side. And we're going to create this safe zone. We're going to go to Switzerland. We're going to discuss with your lawyer and the corporate lawyer, and we know what will be the conversation. They won't understand each other. They will talk about two different things. So we will address that first in order to create the environment for collaboration. And it's a people business. And then we'll put the dollar on it. We'll put the glue. And that's what we've done with a couple of spin-off from the MIT, with the Airbus factory in the US, and the rest of the world as well. It's not always successful, right? Let's be clear. I think you've got the pattern, and I'm not the guy that says everything's fine. It's complicated, but when you do it right, actually, in few occasions, it works. And people can point towards the success and say, you said it would work, and actually it did work, so maybe we'll do that again. But the disconnect you mentioned is a real issue.
I really think the corporates really have to think very carefully on what the objective is and how they can do it. A lot of big companies think, okay, we're gonna just have a corporate venture capital unit and have some open innovation team, and they think everything will happen. It really doesn't happen that way. You have to really think how to structure it right, how to incentivize the team, and how to go out there and work with startups to make things right. And there are some more sophisticated corporate venture capital or open innovation teams that understand that. There are a lot of corporates who don't. A lot of the challenges that I sometimes face being on that, I guess, docking pad, being at the corporate venture capital side, is people at headquarters saying, oh, okay, we're investing. What kind of IP are we getting? Are we getting exclusivity? What, right? It really doesn't happen that way. I mean, you cannot try to build a relationship when you're trying to monopolize a technology or a business from the startup. You really have to be, just providing insight and access and just building a structure that works on both sides.
That's a really great point. I mean, part of what we do is really also about being access, bringing the two sides together, and encouraging that interaction. So some of the things we've done is having more repeated events, people can connect, having more in-depth conversation, one-on-ones, to try to help with that. But it sounds like you're saying there's also sort of the internal education that's involved. Maybe you can just elaborate a bit on how to educate the rest of the organization on how to work with a startup.
So from my experience, I mean, the best is having done a few times. Really, people, like, for example, I work with a big company in Korea. Somebody sitting in Korea, it's very hard for them to understand how it's going to work. I mean, no matter how much I can teach them. But if you're given the freedom to just invest in a few companies, try to build a relationship and have some success cases, and then they start to see it. It's like, wow, this happened with this startup, it was spectacular success. Obviously, we cannot expect to succeed on every single relationship that we have, but on some ones that do, I mean, it does produce big impact in the corporate. So I think that's very important, to be given that freedom to just explore first and then try to prove your value later.
I think so. I think the other thing is, if the big corporations understand the radical difference in scale, when you do get big, you have to be careful. You have to actually check out the corner cases. You have to make sure that you've done all the QA and you've tried all the various different things, because the cost of failure is radically different. But if you extrapolate that down into the startup, this is where big companies get into problems. They try to leverage that because that's their strength. They're really good at that. They have to create a radically different environment. When we were at Staples back in the early days, when we started sort of the e-commerce, one of the things we did was we isolated from the rest of the company, because when we started it inside the company, even at that point, you could see it being subsumed by the rest of the organization. Everyone was adding their 5 cents, their 10 cents, their 20 cents, and pretty soon they're so weighed down by all the things that it had to do, even before it came into being, that it was so clear it wasn't going anywhere. So we structurally changed how we address that. So we allowed it to innovate in its own space and innovate, make mistakes, and move rapidly, where the rest of the company was trying now to stabilize as it became a larger organization and was trying not to make mistakes. So I think that a very real understanding of the radical change in scale is what's so important. And a lot of executives now get that. They know that if they're talking about a different scale, they should behave differently. But that's the danger, is that they're trying to extrapolate in a large scale to the small scale, which is the kiss of death.
I want to open up a question pretty soon, but do be prepared. But meanwhile, I do want to ask Professor Musker, you've seen it from both sides. What have you seen work well in terms of corporation working well with startups?
Yeah, I think you said it right. It's really kind of a people problem, and I think events like this help. So when I was working for a very large company in their VR division, I was in the investment committee, and I tried to do 3 things in my role. And the first thing I realized right away is that the friction, the amount of time that gets spent in having a conversation between corporate entity and a startup was taking too much. You have to know the right people, and you meet them, and then one of the VP says, hey, you should check out this company. They come in, you spend a whole day, you have some questions. The engineers say we can do better than these guys, and so it just kind of goes downhill. And so how do you improve that? So the one strategy I came up with that company implemented eventually is putting out small challenges out there in public domain and see how people are responding to it. And that worked out actually really well. So in some cases, data sets, some of it is kind of a call for proposals. And what we did is actually we took some of those data sets and made them available at academic conferences. So the startups are competing not just with other startups, but they're competing with the best research grade output as well. And this works better in more AI, kind of machine learning, computer vision, and NLP, and so on. Maybe not in other sectors. And the other one is kind of having the small challenges. The second strategy that seemed to work really well for us is to reduce this friction and improving the impedance match, is to actually have so-called startup days. So I initiated this process in my role and working with our BizDev and Corp Dev committees to see if we would sit every Tuesday and look at these 300 startups that we're supposed to look at, and we have this large spreadsheet, and it would be impossible to make progress because we have so little data about them, and it's just kind of very sparse data coming in. And so what we did is we started creating these RFPs, and we said a quarter from now, on a particular day, there are going to be 3 hours which is going to be open, and you can come on campus and talk to us. And we created a small pool, not much larger than this room, to get them to come and talk to us for about 3 hours. And that speeded up a lot of process in many ways. So I think kind of improving the people-to-people interaction alone, we thought was a pretty good start. The third one, so there are basically 3 secrets to how to become successful in this space. The first one is kind of put the data out there. The second one is have this startup days, and third one is never share the third secret. I just realized I'm under NDA, so I can talk about it.
Great. Questions from the audience? Yeah. Don't be shy. Great.
I have a question. Just yesterday, we were working with a startup in the Bay Area that had a pretty disruptive technology, vision analytics. So just yesterday, anyway, we were working with this startup and done successful POC. And the meeting yesterday was to look at progress, how to move forward. And it was very interesting because they put a timeline on there that was within months, and I had a timeline that was almost a year out. So I saw some of you guys make that comment. How do you bridge that gap? Even though we've been working with them for 2 years now, and we're ready to expand, and we've talked about what we need to do to make the POC successful. How do you bridge this gap where there are pressure on investors to move fast and show progress, and we, as you said, have to look at all the corners and make sure we are clear on that? Any advice would be appreciated.
Everybody hear the question? How do we match timelines? Startups in number of months, big companies in a year and a half.
So yeah, I have a interesting comment that a startup CEO made regarding the difference in speed. So in the amount of time that it takes for a big company to schedule a meeting, a startup usually makes 100 decisions. So that's how big the speed of execution is between a startup and a large company. At the end of the day, I think really you have to, the big company has to really work in a different way. You cannot have the typical, your normal R&D guys work with a startup because it's just too big of a difference in culture. You probably have to have sort of a very fast execution team, maybe just pick a few team guys from the team to work very closely with a startup. Maybe it might be even a good idea to send them to the company to work there on site and adapt to their culture, because obviously it doesn't make sense for the startup to adapt to the big company's culture and slow down. So I think really the burden is on the big company side to try to adapt to the new reality.
So if I may just, as a concrete way to create this kind of realignment of clocks, we have to create this sense of urgency, right? And because it's real in the world of startup, it's not fake, right? The timeline is literally, investors are not just pushing them to get the cash out, it's just they have a cash runway that you're looking at. It's a matter of weeks, months, sometimes a bit more, but not more than that. So it's a survival question for them. So they don't have the luxury to go wait. And corporate, I mean, yes, it's slow, on average, because believe me, when you get an aircraft stuck on the ground and you get 24 hours to take it off the ground, and there's a major mechanical issue, you put the right people around the table in 5 minutes, right? When you have a crash, not to mention investigation and regulators and everything, because you need to solve the problem. So any industry has this ability to change the clock. It's just a question of, do they see the urgency? And so the question may be then, how do you create the urgency, right? Well, by letting the startup be free, right? If corporate keep investing in a way that it's mine, right? It's an acquisition or down payment on acquisition when I do early stage VC. Well, there's this sense that this company will be there for me forever. The moment you understand that actually, if you're not deploying with you guys, they're going to deploy with the next guy, which happens to be a competitor, and you as an investor carrying the brand, you can do that and push them on the other side. Believe me, the urgency just comes, and people realize this is their chance, and so they take it. They change the roadmap. They put different people. It's not the traditional R&D guys, and there's a change of behavior, as we mentioned. But we need that.
I think two things. One is you're up against, what I find working with big corporations is you get through a functional area and then you hit the wall of the next one. And if you can, you want to try to, sorry, feedback, but you want to try to anticipate that a little bit and ask for an introduction to the next one. It's conditional, but, and you only get this through experience. You know, when you're in it, you're so excited that you got the POC, or you got the pilot, that you're just trying to make it work. But having been through it a few times, it's like, it's necessary but not sufficient. And so understanding what that scaling looks like and beginning to ask those questions, because the number one thing in a major corporation is never surprise the executive. So you have to begin to propagate, you have a forward wave of information that has to move it forward. Good news or bad news, a surprise is a very bad thing in a large corporation. So you're trying to create a propagation wave of information that's moving. It's conditional. You don't have to know the answer, but you have to propagate ahead of yourself. Now, once you're stuck, you're stuck. So I don't actually think you're gonna, there's not sort of an immediate, oh, get out of jail free card. But if you are in that sense again, figure out a way to propagate that wave of information with one or two pieces of, a little bit of a hook or a little bit of what's valuable if it works kind of thing. But lacking that, you are actually working through a series of functional gates which are doing exactly what they were designed to do in the corporation. So the corporation is functioning perfectly for their objective, just not yours. And the only way to do that is to propagate a wave of information to at least crack that door so it's not surprising.
Some stuff that startups can do to try to encourage more going from POC to propagate to the rest of the company. The other question I get often from folks in the innovation team from companies is also how do I want to innovate, how do I get the rest of my organization to innovate? So I do tell them sometimes get your execs to come to startup events. At MIT we also do these executive briefings, so when your executive team wants to do an offsite, try to come do it with us so that they can expose to some new ideas and some startups. That's some of the things maybe the corporates can do to try to push that. Great, other questions? Come on, it's the end of the day, let's let loose. We had some wine earlier during lunch, so.
Thomas has a point.
I just wanted to
Okay,
rebound
yes.
on the executive conversation, which are essential, and yes, we don't want to surprise people at the top, but I mean, on corporate venture, traditional governance, there is some level of buy-in that some people want or need to actually strike an investment and engage with startup, right? And actually, what I've observed is we have little time with the top management of our respective mothership, right? It could be an hour a week or an hour a month, or sometimes you get all the board of director that comes to see you. And if you're spending this very precious time discussing what we should do as venture capitalists and the investment we will make, you're actually burning the precious time to talk about the investment you've made and what you can actually do with it. And suddenly when you switch the conversation to, when I talk to the CEO of Airbus, I never talk about, hey, I have that in the pipe, what do you think? No, I said, well, listen, here's the company, and here's what they've done, and here's how they're going to change the world. And his brain is functioning completely differently. Then all the protection of, I need to protect the brand. No, decision is made. Thomas is going to get burned if he made a mistake, it's fine. So I'm the fuse, it's okay. He can put his whole power and is so creative that it actually come up with solution, and that's from the top. And that's very precious. I think if we could rebalance corporate venture into what we should do, talk to our executive on what we can build, then it would actually improve drastically.
I see a lot of nodding heads, sounds pretty exciting. We should all try that with for management. Good, great.
So I have a question around vendor versus owning, right? So in some cases when the startup is working on a POC with the customer, at some point the customer may, in some rare cases, says, you know what, we need to own this, it's too strategic. When that phase change happens, how do you guys think about that interface that you have with the startup? Do you start delivering, do you start using a whole different set of language? Do you start signaling? What have you guys seen that work well and not work well there? Yeah.
I really think if a big company wants to own the technology, you should really apply the company. I mean, try to work with a startup as a partner, and then try to own that technology just doesn't work, because just definitely the interest is you don't have the same interest. Startup wants to grow and be acquired or IPO. If the company wants to own that, obviously you're not helping it grow. So again, I think the big company needs to really change the mentality.
I mean, in my experience, coming more from a VR, AR imaging point of view, I found it very challenging to convince the leadership to just make a very clear distinction between kind of whether to build it or buy it. And I think there's natural inclination to just own everything. It's not very easy to see how we can have a vendor-style relationship and go on. So, in very broadly speaking, I haven't seen the vendor-style relationship last for too long. And the moment it starts becoming somewhat important to the company and the company's resources, its tendencies to act.
Does that have implication for the company at the startup? Does it, it's sometimes it's good. It's an acquisition. Right?
In my opinion, I think a lot of that comes from the risk profile of the leadership. And I think they're just trying to cover their backs, and often they don't want to come up with a very kind of synergistic relationship with an external entity that they may or may not be able to contain. But in many areas, I mean, if you're building a VR headset or an AR headset, things like eye tracking and new imaging systems and head tracking, and this is happening in self-driving car industry as well. Why is everybody doing the same exact thing when in the end they're going to use almost very similar solutions? So I think we are, seeing a classic Silicon Valley, just wastage of resources and time when everybody's building almost the same thing and their patterns are all intertwined, and startups actually probably doing a much better job from all of them, but they just haven't figured out how to kind of stabilize that. In the machine learning world, surprisingly, things are much better. We have open data sets, we have open standards. People publish pretty much the day they think of that idea. Talent goes back and forth, there are open standards. So surprisingly, machine learning world is moving very, very fast because of that co-creation mindset. But this competitive mindset, what Vaikul is asking, is really hurting the industry overall.
I have a question over here. Can you hear me? I have a booming voice if you can. Anyway, back to your point, Thomas, on the Elon Musk or the rocket. I'm in corporate relations, and I see it work very well when there is an identified business need and there's incremental innovation that you can incorporate. The big company can incorporate into the trajectory they're on. But when it comes to disruptive innovation, I see companies getting excited about it, but it never happens, right? You can't disrupt this grinding forward big machine that has, these objectives. So the companies tend to go out and disrupt and create, and then the big corporation is kind of freaking out. I can give an example with Gillette and the Dollar Shave Club as one example that I've witnessed working on, but until it's like really there and really threatening and almost too big to swallow, right? How do you do it? What would you have done differently?
No, that's a great question, and when disruption is at stake, and not just incremental element as you mentioned, but the true disruption of the company in which we invested 2 years ago is actually solving the rocket equation by removing the rockets. When you start with a statement like, well, just walk me through, well, there's different form of energy, and kinetic energy is one. So this company is actually building a space catapult. So just picture the conversation in front of rocket people, right? They were just like, no. There's a limit to the conversation. So of course, disruption cannot go through the door. 2 years down the road, the company is actually, as we speak, building the real size prototype in New Mexico. And yes, they will put a payload in space in probably, I won't give any timeline, but this is becoming real to the point the DoD has signed a contract, to the point the industry is saying, whoa, alternative way to go to space, right? So, but the point here, there's no way you can win the battle with the rocket people. You can't. They've been working on rocket their entire life. You remove their toy from the game. This is not possible. But what about the satellite people that belong to the same corporation in a different boss? Well, they don't really care. They care about their satellite. They don't care about how you launch it, as long as it survives. So here comes people that are actually creative and say, wow, we can do things differently, right? Or even comm people or connectivity people that says, wow, what regime are you talking about? What speed are you talking? Wow, hypersonic, interesting, good thing. So, and there we go. So the question is just to the docking point we mentioned earlier. A corporate is like the ISS. This is a giant thing, right, floating in the air. And one, you're just a little tiny capsule and you want to create something, well, you need your docking point. And it's not obvious to find it, right? But our job, right, is to be kind of this guide to the right part of the system that actually can listen and act upon this disruption. And it's not obvious. And to me, I thought the rocket people would love it, right? I just underestimated how much they will call me crazy. And still, right? And we will need another couple of years to prove them wrong. And we may fail, 90% chance that we fail. But that's the game in which we are. Startup disruption, is a complicated story. So I don't know if that answered completely your question, but it's how we do things.
I think the only place I've ever seen it succeed is really with corporations that manage it all, like portfolio management. And part of the portfolio management is isolating it from the rest of the organization. We used to joke about the natural killing agents in major corporations. I mean, their first reaction is kill them. It happens every single time. That's disruptive killing, because it's going to make my life worse. There's nothing for me to gain. So all the natural antibodies of corporations come out, and wham, it happens incredibly fast. So you need portfolio management. You need to actually isolate it carefully. And there's a part of it, bigger corporations can actually do this because you can isolate that, but physically they need to be separated. It's sort of like, you know, if you have kids that they fight all the time, you really need, it's not very productive. You need it way over here, someplace else. And manage that corporation and that portfolio. And to your point, it takes some skill to figure out, and you have to actually rotate through different parts of the company. Like, oh, that one's feeling pretty good, so maybe they'll step up here. But you actually need enough space and time to let these little things get to sufficient scale to stand on their own and actually engage the corporation. So that's the only way I've ever seen it happen.
And the interesting thing is that the project killers tends to be the C-suite people, CEOs, CFOs, and in some cases CTOs, who wants to kill different projects. Because they have a different mentality. I mean, if you're a CFO or a CEO, you just think about, you know, meeting the P&L, and then you don't even know whether you'll have a job or not in the next couple of years or not. So they tend to be more focused. So that's why you really need in a big company a more independent group that makes more autonomous decisions and try to push disruption. Otherwise, if everything goes to the top, it's just very hard.
Actually, speaking of P&L, John Wats's current startup is about P&L analytics. So how do you go about navigating who to sell to? Is it the CFO? Is this? Give us a concrete example of navigating an organization.
Well, it really depends on the current problem set for any given company. You tend to have to go in a place where they recognize that there's a place for them that they have to solve a problem. We've always taught managers their job is to solve problems. So you have to sort of come in the way that they're willing to listen to you. And what we end up trying to get them to understand is that if you've pulled all your resources to your problems, you've left exposure on where you're actually making money. And most companies can't see below the average of their P&L. So we show them the high concentrations of profit. And the first thing we do is get them to put resources back to where they're making money. Because without exception, every major corporation we've worked with, they have stripped resources from their strengths to try to solve these problems, and they are actually leaving money on the table, and that money, by the way, could be used very successfully to fund a venture group or to invest and innovate, because the bigger the corporations get, the less likely they are to innovate, and you actually have to create this separate pod to do innovation, because corporations aren't unto themselves designed to innovate. So we're pretty sensitive to the nature of corporations. I'm a big fan of them, but there are limitations, and learning how to navigate them is not easy.
Yeah, so if you need to help your upper management find some pockets of money to fund your operations, you know who to call. Cool. Any other last questions? Great.
So as a middleman between corporations and startups, I also feel all the problems that you pointed out too. Yes, I do feel it. But I've seen good cases out there too. For example, platforms like Plug and Play or JLabs, they have this no string attached model. They invite startups and create this very healthy ecosystem. And the major business model for Plug and Play is to gain the membership fees from corporations. And it works well for both startups and also corporations. So I even think about it, this could be the future of venture capital. And I just want to see what your take is. What do you think about this?
Well, let's see. Just you used two very important terms, healthy environment. And I'm sorry, but I won't go VC as a completely healthy environment. There's a couple of things we could fix and should fix. So there's work there. And the no strings attached. That's how we operate, because that makes a huge difference. That's what I said, we don't promise outcome, we deliver access. Is we don't create this notion of contract for the future or exclusivity in return or right of first refusal. I mean, I understand the need for that at the corporate level when they decide But when we decide we don't need that, and that's a major shift.
I think, most corporate venture capital who've been doing it for a long time and get it. I mean, they know what works and what doesn't. The problem is they should be given enough authority to make decisions and build relationship without somebody at the top trying to interfere with every move or every investment. So I think how you structure it and then building a sophisticated team, those are two key things.
Let's take a moment to thank our panel for some great talk.